There's a strange moment in adulthood when you realize something unsettling. Money doesn't work the way you were taught. You grow up hearing the same rules. Work hard, save, invest, be smart, and life will reward you. But then you look around, and none of it adds up. Some people rise effortlessly. Others work themselves to exhaustion and stay stuck. Wealth seems to flow to the same groups, the same families, the same positions of power, no matter what decade it is, no matter what country you're in. Where is that written? Who decided it? Why does it keep happening? Before we dive into this, hit subscribe, because you're about to learn the laws of money nobody ever explains, but everyone feels. The truth begins centuries ago, long before credit cards, central banks, Wall Street, or inflation reports. Back when money was simple, metal coins, farm goods, handwritten ledgers, yet the forces that governed it were anything but simple. 3 laws were discovered, not created, by watching how humans behave around wealth. And once people realized how predictable those behaviors were, they started using those laws to their advantage. Over time, the people who understood these laws shaped economies, built empires, and designed the systems we live under today. The strange part? Those laws never disappeared. They simply went quiet. They sit in the background of every modern financial crisis. Every boom, every crash, every moment where money shifts hands. They decide who gets richer during inflation. They determine why wages lag behind prices. They explain why new money always feels like it benefits someone else first. And if you look closely, you see them everywhere. In central bank decisions, in government policies, in corporate behavior, even in the way regular people respond to rising prices. But let's start with the simplest observation of all, the one that opened the door. Not all money is equal. Some money moves faster. Some money gets you access. Some money loses value. Some money gains it. People pretend they're the same, but the system doesn't. And once you understand that, the entire economy starts to look like a machine with hidden gears you were never taught to see. When you step back and observe the past 300 years, nobody predicted the modern world. Nobody expected trillion-dollar stock markets, negative interest rates, crypto, quantitative easing, endless debt cycles, or billionaires shaping global politics. But the laws behind those outcomes, the invisible rules that determine who rises and who falls, were already in motion long before any of this existed. Our story begins with thinkers who weren't economists in the modern sense. They were observers, people who watched how money behaved during war, famine, inflation, deflation, social instability, and wrote down the patterns they saw repeating over and over again. Patterns of how bad money drives out good. Patterns of how new money creates inequality the moment it is born. Patterns of how, in every society, wealth naturally distributes itself in a predictable curve, no matter who is in charge. These laws didn't care about ideology. They didn't care about politics. They didn't care about morality. They only cared about behavior. And when you see the world through that lens, you understand something uncomfortable. The economy isn't random. It isn't fair. And it definitely isn't designed to treat everyone equally. It rewards proximity. It rewards timing. It rewards position. It rewards understanding. Not effort. Not morality. Understanding. And that's where our journey begins, with the first of these laws quietly shaping history, creeping through centuries, influencing kings, governments, currencies, businesses, and eventually, the world you wake up in every morning. This is the moment where the old world meets the new, where the rules written in dusty books suddenly describe the very economy everyone thinks is modern. Because the mystery of money isn't that it changed. The mystery is how much it stayed the same. The first law doesn't begin with a government, a bank, or a politician. It begins with a problem so old, it predates the modern concept of economics. What happens when people don't trust the money in their hands? Centuries ago, when gold and silver coins were the foundation of trade, something strange kept happening. Whenever a kingdom issued coins with less gold or silver content, maybe to pay for wars, maybe to stretch the treasury, maybe to hide a deficit, people noticed. Not officially, not publicly, but quietly, instinctively. And something even stranger followed. People spent the bad coins and hid the good ones. Slowly at first, then rapidly, then universally. It didn't matter if the new coins looked shiny. It didn't matter if the king insisted they were worth the same. It didn't matter if the penalties for refusing them were harsh. Human behavior overpowered the decree. The good money vanished from circulation. The bad money took over the streets. And the economy hollowed itself out from the inside. This wasn't a theory. It was a pattern so consistent that an English economist named Sir Thomas Gresham finally gave it a name: Gresham's law. When bad money enters a system, good money disappears. It's not a slogan. It's an instinct, a kind of survival mechanism built into the human relationship with value. And the eerie part? This ancient law is still alive right now. Every time inflation rises, people push their dollars, euros, pounds, or naira into assets: real estate, stocks, gold, crypto, anything that holds value better than the currency in their wallets. Every time governments print new money to stimulate growth, savers feel the quiet pressure to protect themselves. Every time a currency weakens, capital runs towards something stronger. Bad money out, good money hidden. Same pattern as centuries ago. You see it in dollarized countries. You see it in developing economies. You see it in advanced nations quietly drifting into inflation. You see it in the explosion of alternative assets. Most people think inflation destroys value. But inflation does something far more structural. It turns money into a game, a race, a timer. Spend or lose. Invest or fall behind. Protect or get diluted. Gresham's law isn't a relic. It's the silent engine behind every modern rush into assets, every bubble, every run on banks, every moment when society instinctively tries to shield itself from the erosion of value. But that's only the first law, the most visible one. The next law is quieter, more dangerous, more uncomfortable, because it doesn't just explain what happens to money once it's created, it explains what happens when it is created. The Cantillon effect, a law that tells you, bluntly, coldly, that the people closest to the creation of new money benefit first, benefit most, and benefit automatically. And everyone else, they get what's left after prices adjust. This law was discovered long before the Federal Reserve, long before the IMF, long before quantitative easing, long before central banks became the invisible architects of global markets. Richard Cantillon didn't have computer models or inflation charts. He had observation. He watched money enter the economy from the hands of the wealthy, the powerful, the politically connected, and he watched how it spread outward. It never spread evenly. It never spread fairly. It never spread without consequence. The first receivers got more purchasing power. The second receivers got less. The last receivers, the workers, the savers, the families far from the centers of power, they received the new money only after prices had already risen. The wealthy get inflation later. The poor get inflation first. Economists rarely say it this plainly, but Cantillon did, and he said it 300 years ago. And today, this effect is the blueprint for the entire global financial structure. The reason asset prices rise before wages. The reason wealth gaps widen during every round of money printing. The reason central bank policies feel beneficial to markets, but destructive to households. The money doesn't enter where you think it does. It enters at the top and trickles down only after the elite have already positioned themselves. You saw it in 2008. You saw it in 2020. You see it every time a crisis hits. Liquidity injected into banks, hedge funds, large corporations, asset markets, long before it touches wages, savings, or living standards. It's not corruption. It's not conspiracy. It's a law, an old one, a predictable one, and the system is built around it. Gresham's law explains how money decays once trust weakens. Cantillon's law explains how wealth concentrates the moment new money is born. But there is a final law, one that doesn't just reveal how money moves, it reveals how wealth settles. A law that predicts inequality with unnerving accuracy. A law so consistent that it appears in nature, biology, cities, businesses, social networks, and even the growth of stars. Pareto's law, the 80-20 rule. Not a rule of fairness, a rule of distribution. A pattern that says, in almost every system, most of the results come from a minority of the inputs. 80% of wealth held by 20% of people. 80% of profits generated by 20% of businesses. 80% of influence controlled by 20% of decision makers. It doesn't matter if the system is capitalist, socialist, democratic, authoritarian. The pattern keeps reappearing. It's structural, not ideological. And today, that pattern is tightening. What started as 80-20 has shifted in some economies toward 90-10s, and in extreme cases, 99.1. People debate morality. People debate fairness. People debate political solutions. But the system isn't operating on morality. It's operating on mathematical gravity. And if you combine these three ancient laws, Gresham, Cantillon, Pareto, something unsettling emerges. A map, a blueprint, a quiet explanation for why the rich stay ahead, why the middle class keeps getting squeezed, why inflation feels targeted, why every economic boom seems to benefit the same group, and why opportunity feels like it has invisible gates around it. Because the truth is simple. We're not living in a modern economy. We're living in a 300-year-old machine. A machine built on predictable behavior, predictable inequality, predictable consequences. A machine that rewards anyone who understands its laws and quietly punishes anyone who doesn't. And that machine has been running far longer than any of us have been alive. Once you understand these laws, the world stops looking chaotic. It stops looking unpredictable. It stops looking like random winners and losers. Instead, you begin to see structure, a structure hiding in plain sight, shaping every financial event we think is new. And that's when the past and present start merging, not in theory, but in behavior. Because the people who rise fastest in our modern world aren't the hardest workers. They aren't the smartest. They aren't even the most innovative. They are the ones standing closest to the tap, the point where new money, new opportunities, new information, and new incentives enter the system. That's not ambition. That's geometry. Imagine a drop of ink falling into water. It spreads outward in a pattern, always starting from the center. The people closest to the center see the color first. The people at the edges see it last. That is the Cantillon effect. That is modern inflation. That is the architecture of wealth. But something more subtle happens when these laws interact. When bad money pushes out good. When new money enriches the first receivers. When wealth concentrates into the same hands. A pressure begins to build. The same pressure that triggered revolutions throughout history. The same pressure that destabilized empires, toppled currencies, and destroyed dynasties. A pressure not of poverty, but of imbalance. Because societies don't break when people are poor. They break when the rules feel rigged. When the opportunity ladder collapses. When hard work stops translating into upward movement. That's when the system becomes sand, shifting, unstable, unpredictable. People sense the imbalance long before economists do. You're seeing that tension rise today. You see it in the labor market, where wages refuse to keep up with asset prices. You see it in the housing market, where homes have turned into speculative chips instead of shelter. You see it in the stock market, where valuations ascend even when profits don't. You see it in how governments lean more heavily on debt, and how central banks keep stepping in to stabilize a system that can destabilize itself. The machine is aging, but the laws governing it haven't aged at all. Look closer, and you start recognizing something eerie. These laws aren't just economic concepts. They behave like laws of physics. Where money flows, power flows. Where power flows, opportunity flows. Where opportunity flows, wealth accumulates. And where wealth accumulates, the system reshapes itself to protect the accumulated wealth. It's a loop, a self-reinforcing cycle, and it has repeated across nations, centuries, and political systems. People think capitalism invented inequality. Others think socialism solves it. Others blame corruption, demographics, cultures, policies. Yet the pattern stays the same no matter what ideology governs the surface. Why? Because the laws underneath don't change. You can put different leaders in the driver's seat. You can paint the economy with different political colors. You can change the rhetoric, the branding, the promises. But the engine remains the same, humming quietly behind every chart, every crisis, every boom. And once you see the engine, something else becomes clear. You begin to understand why the rich don't fear inflation the way the middle class does. Why the elite don't panic during recessions the way regular households do. Why capital seems to survive every economic disaster, while workers get hit first and recover last. They're not lucky. They're not chosen. They're not inherently different. They're simply closer to the source, the place where new money enters the world. That's why every crisis ends with the same outcome. Wealth shifts upward. Power shifts inward. The middle squeezes. The bottom breaks. And the top rebalances, untouched. This isn't cynicism. This is structure. The same structure that existed in the 1700s, in the 1800s, in the Industrial Revolution, in the Gilded Age, in the post-war era, and still exists in the digital age today. Because when you compress the timeline of human finance into a single story, one truth becomes unavoidable. Modern money is ancient. Modern inequality is predictable. Modern wealth is mathematical. And the most surprising part? These laws don't just decide who gets rich. They decide how long a system can survive. Because no society can run forever with money losing trust, with new money deepening inequality, with wealth concentrating into tighter and tighter circles. Eventually, systems like this don't collapse from financial stress. They collapse from social stress. And history shows, every time, that the breaking point arrives quietly, gradually, invisibly, until it arrives all at once. And this is where the hidden truth snaps into focus. The moment the three ancient laws stop being concepts and reveal themselves as the blueprint of our world. Because once you trace the patterns far enough, you realize something chilling. We aren't living in a modern economy. We're living in a 300-year-old algorithm. Gresham's law decides what money survives. The Cantillon effect decides who gets the new money first. Pareto's law decides where the wealth ultimately settles. Every bubble, every crash, every bailout, every inflation cycle, they all follow the same choreography written centuries before central banks even existed. And here's the twist. The people who win aren't playing harder. They're playing closer to the rules. Everyone else is playing inside the consequences. That is the climax of this entire story. The moment you recognize that wealth isn't random, opportunity isn't distributed equally, and the system doesn't reward effort, it rewards position. Once you see the machine, you can never unsee it. And the moment you understand these laws, you stop taking the economy at face value. You begin to understand why money behaves the way it does, why wealth flows the way it does, and why history keeps repeating, not because humans forget, but because the system never changes. The only real choice isn't to fight the machine. It's to learn how it moves and position yourself closer to its center. Subscribe for more truths the system never teaches, but always follows.